It is time to finish the tree house quilt. Today I'm going to finish the quilting, add on the binding, and add some super cute details to this quilt. Hi there, and welcome to a new video on the Sugaridoo channel. My name is Irene, and Sugaridoo is all about happy crafty projects for quilting and crochet. And today I'm working on the tree house quilt for I think the last time. I think today I'm going to finish the whole quilt and the binding, and even will add some details with some hand stitching to the quilt. So that's what we're going to do in this video. But first of all, I wanted to say a super big thank you to everyone who subscribed to my channel. I've reached 5,000 subscribers. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of you viewers. And thank you so much for supporting my channel and supporting my business. If you haven't subscribed to the Sugaridoo channel, just hit the subscribe button, and thank you so much for following along on my quilty adventures on the YouTubes. So today I'm going to finish the quilting on the tree house quilt, because I already started quilting, and I started quilting triangles. So let me see if I can show you. Here we have the first triangles on the quilt. I already did half of the quilt with a pattern from my 101 quilting patterns for straight line quilting. You can get that free ebook in the link below, and I will also make a pop-up somewhere on this screen, so you can grab your free ebook to get quilting ideas. And this is one of those quilting designs, and I've put it on this quilt. Go watch my previous video, or 2 videos ago, to see why I picked this one and how I came up with the size of the quilting. But today I'm going to finish it because I'm halfway on quilting it, and I'm going to show you a few methods on how to put those straight lines on your quilt. There are multiple ways to get your straight line quilting design on your quilt. One way to do that, for example, is using erasable markers. And even though I like to use erasable markers on small projects, and when I, for example, need to do some hand stitching, I like to draw that first with an erasable marker. But on a big quilt top like this one, and especially a light colored one, I'm not brave enough to use erasable markers because I'm not really sure that they will erase. So what I love to do is put my lines on my quilt with masking tape. And this is just a cheap masking tape which you use for painting your house. And it works perfectly on your quilt. You can put it on there, stitch along the tape, and then take it off. It's really easy to use. So for the design of the triangles on this quilt, I started by making horizontal lines, and for that I used the blocks as a guidance. So I started stitching in the ditch between the blocks, and then I stitched between those lines and made lines that were 2.5 inch apart, since my blocks are 10-inch big. So after I've sewn all those horizontal lines, it was time to make some diagonal lines to create the triangles. And here's how I did that. So I started quilting with these horizontal lines, and after I finished them on the whole quilt, I started with the diagonal lines. So how you make those diagonal lines is you use a ruler like this one, and that ruler has numbers on it, 30, 45 and 60, and those numbers, they mark the angle that make the line that runs through those numbers with your ruler. And for this quilting design we need 60-degree angles. So we pick our 60 number and take the diagonal line that runs through it. And now we need to line up that diagonal line with our horizontal lines. So I just pick the horizontal line in between my blocks, and then I line up that 60-degree angle line with that horizontal line. and this will mark my first line when I would start quilting. So I can just grab some tape and mark that line. And I will need to mark this all the way from one side to the other side of the quilt. So after marking your first line, you can either start sewing that line and then mark your second, or just mark a few of those lines first and then take it to your sewing machine and sew them all. And when you make those parallel diagonal lines, you need to make sure to make them 2.5 inches apart. So it's the same width they are apart as your horizontal lines. So that's really easy to measure. So I went ahead and took the whole bunch of lines to my sewing machine and sew some diagonal lines. You can repeat that for the whole quilt. So first make the horizontal lines, then make the diagonal lines that point in one direction. And after that, it is time to make the diagonal lines that point in the other direction. Here you see the horizontal lines that I started with on the back of the quilt, because this is a little bit clearer to see. So I've made those horizontal lines, and then I've taped the diagonal lines and sewn them as well. And then it was time to sew the diagonal lines in the other direction. And as you can see, they are a little bit wobbly at some places. And that is because I chose to sew through all the intersections. And when I would have picked a complete straight line and taped that as well, then I would have missed a few of those intersections. I guess because my measurement of those diagonal lines that I did first were not as precise in all places. So I chose to make these lines a little bit wobbly, but hit all the intersections. Because when your quilt is laying on your couch, you will not really notice those wobbly lines. You will only see the triangles and that all the points are matching. So when you can hit perfection with your first set of lines, and then of course your second set of lines will be much straighter. But I chose to make the triangles match and go with a little bit of wobbliness. Here I missed the crossing of the two lines, for example, and that notices way more than a wobbly line where your lines intersect perfectly. So time to finish this side of the quilt, and I don't need to put tape on there or measure it because I'm just going to follow all those intersecting lines. When I'm quilting straight lines on a quilt, I like to roll up my quilt like I did here. So I roll up one side and I roll up the other side so I can sew in the middle, and that gives me a nice grip on my quilt. So here I have a super long one because the diagonal lines make you to tilt your quilt, so that makes it even longer. And then I will just place it on my lap like this. And that way I can easily sew. So let's see where we need to start. Here. And every time you start quilting again after a break, make sure you have the same settings for your thread. So I use a stitch length 4. So I need to reset it when I start sewing again. So I set it 4. And the thread I'm using is a 100% cotton Gutermann, so just a simply white thread that goes wonderful with this quilt, and I really like the quality of it. So the Gutermann thread is the one that I use for all my piecing and also very often for my quilting. When you're quilting your horizontal lines and the first set of diagonal lines, I showed you how to tape that and how you can follow those tape lines to sew. But of course you can also use this little thingy here. That is a guide bar that is on my machine and probably also on yours. It's a little metal thingy, and I can stick it into my walking foot and then set it to a distance which I like. And one on my machine goes to a maximum of 2.5 inches, so that was just enough for me to use it on this quilt, and I can use that as a guidance. But I didn't do that through the whole quilt because you always shift a little bit when you only use this guide bar. At least I shift a little bit. So with the diagonal lines, every 4 or 5 lines, I measured again with my ruler to see if I was still following the 60-degree angle and taped that line. And then I did a few lines with my guide bar, and then I would measure one again, and so I continued through the quilt to make it as precise as possible. All the quilting is done, so now it's time to square up my quilt before I can attach my binding. And to square up my quilt, I use this squared ruler and put it in the corner of my quilt. And just line it up on the outside of my blocks. And then I will use a longer ruler and place it against the squared ruler and just check the lines. And this looks great, so I can cut this side. Final step in the whole process is adding my binding. My mom's helping me in the studio today, and she already made me a nice soft orange binding, and I'm going to put it on the front of the quilt with the machine and then hand stitch it to the back. I think that makes the best looking binding. I did try a few times to machine sew both sides to the quilt, but I never really get it perfect, so I just like to do the front with the machine and then the back with hand stitches. And sewing the final stitches on my binding. There we go. The binding is nicely sewn to the front of the quilt, and now it's time to hand stitch it back. But that's a perfect job to do in the couch. So that was my final machine work that I needed to do on the tree house quilt. Yeah, so I'm going to take it home and hand stitch it to the back this evening, and also do some other super cute stitches on it. Like I said, I'm adding some very fun details, and let me show you now what I'm doing. So these are my very first hand stitched quilt stitches, and I think it's so much fun to add details like this to the quilt. Super fun. I'm using a Aurifil 12 weight, I guess, yarn, and I'm just having fun with some stitches. I think I'll be adding a few more stitches like these around trees or inside the houses. Just have fun with it, with the thick hand quilting yarn. It's the very first time that I'm doing hand quilt stitches, so I'm just learning here, but it's super fun and I really like the look of it. So that brings an end to this final video on the Tree House quilt. I really hope you liked this series where I designed and made a quilt. If so, let me know in the comments below which video or which part of the progress you liked most. And the pattern of the quilt, of the Tree House quilt, is now available on the Sugaridoo website. So you can grab your PDF pattern there. It's a digital pattern, so it's available for all over the world. The pattern is in inches and the blocks are 10-inch and also 6-inch blocks for a baby quilt are included. So go check that out on the Sugaridoo webshop. And also a quilt kit with all the fabrics to make the quilt top for this quilt is available, and that one is available in 2 sizes. So you have one for the smaller quilt and one for the quilt in this size, and this one is 70 by 90 inches. So a pretty big quilt and so much fun to make. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions about the quilt or about the kits or about the pattern, just let me know in the comments below. I'm happy to help you there. I hope you had as much fun watching these videos as I had making them. I really liked recording the whole process of making this quilt, and now it's time for me to go think of my next quilt, I guess. So stay tuned on the Sugaridoo channel, and I really hope to see you next week again. Bye bye!